Do you find yarn overs confusing? If so, you're certainly not alone, and it can be really frustrating when you're trying to work a pattern and you're really not sure how those yarn overs should be worked. If you want to be able to understand yarn over instructions and to work them with confidence, regardless of what your knitting style is, then you're going to find this video really helpful. You'll be a whiz with yarn overs in no time, and you'll soon be able to tackle those fancy pants stitch patterns you've had your eye on. So in today's video, we're going to be covering what are yarn overs, why would we use them, what are the common abbreviations for them and pattern instructions, and how to work them. So first of all, what is an eyelet? An eyelet is where you can create an additional stitch by simply making a loop over the needles, and this will create a deliberate hole. Not the sort of hole here where you've dropped a stitch and it's caused those sort of holes. This is a deliberate hole, and that might be used for a functional purpose. So if you've got something that needs drawstring, for example, little drawstring bag or baby's booties, we want to thread some cord or ribbon through that, so it's got a sort of functional purpose, but very often it's for decorative purposes. So eyelets can be, as we say, used singly, or once you start putting several together, you can form eyelet patterns where they're quite spaced out, or indeed start developing into lace patterns and other fancy stitches. When you work a yarn over, it actually creates that additional stitch, so it can be used also as an increase. Increasing using yarn overs will give you a decorative increase. So if you are, for example, working a sweater from the top down, a raglan sweater, the increases can be worked as eyelets, and that gives a nice decorative effect. We see it quite often on the edges of shawls. If we're doing a top-down shawl, then when we do the increases, we might use a yarn over so that we're getting that nice delicate little hole along the edge just to enhance the design. The way you work yarn overs and the way they're written in patterns will differ depending on two key things really. Firstly is the style of knitting that you work with. So for example, Continental knitting, you will be holding your yarn in your left hand. I really struggle with left and right, and that will usually mean you'll use a yarn over, YO for the abbreviation. Okay, so you loop underneath, and that's your yarn over. You can pop your finger there if you want, just to make sure it stays there, and then you will work your stitch. Okay, so that's my yarn over between my two knit stitches. It's the same action whether you're going from knit to knit, you know, knit, then you yarn over and knit, or you're going knit to purl. You hook under, and then you're going to position yourself. So if you're purling, you're coming over here, yeah, and then you work your stitch as usual. Now, if you work more of an English style, you'll be working the yarn in your right hand, and that kind of involves bringing yarn forwards and backwards so that we can be in the right position to make that loop over the needle for your yarn over. And that's where we get into a number of different abbreviations associated with more English knitters. So that's your yarn forwards, your yarn round needles, your yarn over the needle, and all of that, and that can be quite daunting. I'm always fascinated in how we can knit so differently to get the same results. So leave a comment, let me know what your knitting style is. Is it Continental, is it English, or is it something else? So the second key kind of factor in how you're going to work your yarn over and how it's written is whether you have a knit stitch before or a purl stitch before your yarn over, and then what the following stitch is it knit or purl, and that's going to impact on how that needs to be written and how the stitch needs to be worked. So the first yarn over I'm going to show is between a knit stitch and a knit stitch. As I've been knitting, my yarn is naturally at the back, so I need to just bring that forward through the needles so that it's at the front. Okay, and then I just knit my stitch, and the yarn over kind of naturally happens as I do that, because the yarn goes from the front to the back. Okay, and that is my yarn over between my knit and knit stitch. The yarn over needle is worked between a purl stitch and a knit stitch. Okay, So I've got my yarn already at the front. I always need to start at the front with my yarn overs. So I need to put that over my needle. And then my knit stitch, I need my yarn at the back, so I don't need to do anything further. And then I'm just going to knit the stitch. And sometimes it can feel a bit odd. It's okay. And then I've got my yarn over between my purl and my knit stitch. So yarn round needle is worked between a purl stitch and a purl stitch. My yarn's already at the front, so I just need to put that yarn around or over the needle. As I'm about to do a purl next, that yarn needs to come through the needle again. Okay, ready for me to work that purl stitch. And there we have our yarn over worked. Our last one is our yarn forward round needle. That's very similar to yarn round needle, except we're starting from a knit stitch. Okay, so as we've done a knit stitch, the yarn is at the back. So before we start anything, we need to bring that yarn forward. Then it goes around the needle, and because we're purling, that needs to come back to the front, ready for us to work our purl stitch. And there we have our yarn forward between our knit and our purl stitch. So a few tips to make it easier, so you don't have to think too hard when you're approaching your yarn overs. If you're a continental knitter, just think you need to do yarn overs. So you can ignore quite happily the yarn forwards, the yarn round needles, all those other abbreviations. You just do your usual kind of loop underneath, and then you just work your next stitch however you would work it. So that's straightforward. If you're an English knitter, it can be a bit more complicated. However, you can keep things pretty simple. So if you're reading a pattern that's using the yarn overs for all the abbreviations, it might take a bit more thinking about. You could go through and just write your own abbreviations in if you've got space. But there is an even easier way really, because even if you've got them all written out, you know, if you're anything like me, it's like, oh, which was the knit and then the purl. What you need to think about is whatever way you're working your yarn over, whatever stitches it's in between, in order to wrap the yarn over the needle, it needs to be at the front of the work. Okay, so if you have just done a knit stitch and you're going to do your yarn over, you need to bring the yarn, you know, through the needles to the front of the work. If you've just worked a purl stitch, well, your yarn should already be at the front of your work, so you don't need to do anything before that yarn goes over. So you put the yarn over the needle, and then it's deciding what way to go for the next stitch. So if your next stitch is a knit stitch, well, your yarn is already at the back of the work because it's just gone over the needle. It's sitting at the back of the work. Don't need to do anything else. If you now need to do a purl stitch, then you need to bring that yarn through your needles, not over the needle, back through your needles, so that it's at the front of your work, ready to work that purl stitch. So hopefully that will make life easier for you. So regardless of what the abbreviations are, you're sorted. So a quick bonus for any of you aspiring designers, or if you're just wanting to write out the instructions for yourself, for a friend, whatever. I know that some of you out there are dabbling in the dark arts of pattern writing. So a few things to consider from that front. Firstly, it depends who you're doing that pattern for. If you're doing it for yourself, you've got some decisions to make. If you're actually doing that for a publication, they will usually state exactly how they would like their yarn overs to be dealt with in their style sheet, their house style sheet, okay? And if they've stated that, you must follow that for your pattern to be published. So if you're doing it yourself though, then you will probably want to write your own style sheet or record somewhere what your approach is going to be. There isn't a right or a wrong really. There's decision to think about. If your audience and yourself are continental knitters largely, you might want to just stick with the yarn overs, the YO abbreviation throughout. I would say though, it might well be worth putting in your glossary what the the abbreviation means, but then you might want to say a few words about how to work them between each stitch. It's another option, and that kind of makes it clear for everybody. I've seen more recently, I think a lot of people are just using the yarn over abbreviation anyway. There are benefits to that. It's trying to bring something a bit more universal, but also you're less likely to make errors. You know, if you've got 4 different abbreviations to think about and get right between whether it's a knit or a purl, if you just use the yarn over abbreviation, it's kind of a bit more straightforward. However, you know, you might well want to use the full English. It's like a full English breakfast, doesn't it? The full English yarn over abbreviations. And if that is the case, obviously you need to be very meticulous to make sure you've got the right abbreviations in the right place. And at the end of the day, yarn over or the yarn forwards, etc., whichever one you pick, make sure you're consistent throughout. And throughout that pattern, and ideally if it's your own patterns, if you're independently writing them, through all of your patterns, so that it's consistent throughout. Anyway, I hope that was helpful to you, and I hope you can now feel confident to get cracking with your yarn overs and tackle some of those fancy pants patterns that we've all been looking for. You might want to get adventurous and do add a few little eyelets decoratively. Like in my gradient shawl, I've got some stripes of different textures with eyelets to decorate. I'll put the link for this pattern below, but also along the edge I've got a picot cast off, but I have put some, hopefully you can see, I'm going to put this right near, some little eyelets underneath those picots. So you can start thinking, where might I put some little eyelets? And also, if you are interested in the picot cast off, I've got a video on that, so you might want to watch that one next. I'll put it up in the whichever way it is. Put that up for you to find that video easily. Anyway, happy creating, and I hope to see you soon.